Our next topic for this unit will be solving quadratics using factoring. Now, this is actually using the zero product property. The definition of the zero product property is if there's a factor a and b, where a and b are factors, if a and b is equal to 0 and a and b are factors, then what can we conclude here? We can conclude the factor a is equal to 0 or the factor b is equal to 0. The property is very straightforward, however, is often misinterpreted. So if I'm multiplying two quantities, and let's take a triangle times a square is equal to 0. If two numbers are multiplied together equal to 0, what is true about either number? Well, one of them has to be 0. Well, same here goes for the zero product property. If you have two factors being multiplied together and they're equal to 0, then a or b is 0. So we're going to solve by factoring using the zero product property, and I've just given you an example. X squared plus 8x plus 7 is equal to 0. Well, what we notice is on the left-hand side is that we have a trinomial, and on the right-hand side is 0. So since the right-hand side is 0, we're going to try to use the zero product property. We take a look at the left-hand side, we ask ourselves, is that factorable? And let me try. The coefficient in front of x squared is 1, so I'm going to try the product sum rule. What two numbers add to 7? What two numbers multiply to 7 but add to 8? 1 and 7. So the above trinomial is easily factored. And now what we see is that I have two factors that multiply to 0. So that means that either my first factor, x plus 7, is equal to 0, or my second factor is equal to 0. So really, my next step here, if I know that my first factor, x plus 7, is equal to 0, this implies that x is equal to negative 7, if you subtract 7 from both sides. And my second factor, x plus 1, is equal to 0. This implies that x is equal to negative 1. That is, if you subtract 1 from both sides. So therefore, x is equal to negative 7, negative 1 are solutions. So what is going down here? Well, we're going to have a quadratic or a trinomial that is equal to 0. And it gives us a very powerful position. So we're going to let one side equate to 0. And the next step, really, it is just factor if you can. How can you factor? I don't know. Just try. So some things aren't factorable as we see, which will give us some more headaches. But if you could see a way to factor, this would be good. And then here, the next step is just equate each factor to 0. And that's all there really is to it. And the last step is to solve each factor. So the keys to quadratic factoring, for me, are let one side be 0. And just what we've seen up top, if you equate one side to 0 and you factor, then the first factor is equal to 0 or the second factor is equal to 0. Under these two conditions, the equation will be 0. So really the zero product property, a big hint is you have to let one side equal to 0. And if it's not, force it. Let's move on to the next example. Solve the following equation by factoring. Fair enough, it's a difference of squares. Check your solution by substitution into the equation. All right, I take a look here. It's a difference of squares. I'm going to try to solve by factoring. One side is equal to 0. I factor into the conjugate. There we are. And now one side is equal to 0, so this is just factored. So I'm going to use the zero product property. And I'm just going to now equate both factors equal to 0, so that really x minus 2 is equal to 0, or x plus 2 is equal to 0. So I have two possible conditions where the above is true. So I'm going to solve for each factor. I get x is equal to 2 and x is equal to negative 2. So and that would be my solutions. And then we can check if x is equal to negative 2. What we get is, remember that we're trying to see when x squared minus 4 is equal to 0. So it's really negative 2 squared minus 4 is equal to 0. Negative 2 squared is 4 minus 4 is equal to 0. 0 is equal to 0. So under this condition, our original equation is true. Now, x is equal to 2, and this would be our check. So we'd have 2 squared minus 4 is equal to 0. 4 minus 4 is equal to 0, or 0 is equal to 0. This also checks out. So our equation is true for the variables x when x is equal to negative 2 or x is equal to positive 2.